I'm going to hand over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, to all the ladies and gentlemen out there across the world listening to this. I appreciate the opportunity to be presenting today, and I want to thank our hosts for both Mike and Randy for this opportunity once again. I think this is my third time to present to this group, and it's always a pleasure. Today, well, some of you may not know who I am. I'm Bob Kochan. I'm the principal forensic engineer of Forensic Marine Investigations International. I'm sure you can read that. I have been performing failure analyses and loss investigations in the marine field for probably since 1979, okay? I graduated from college in mechanical ocean engineering in 1973. So that gives you a little bit of a taste for how much gray hair I have if you can't see it. I've been fortunate to be involved in everything from jet ski accidents to major marina losses, fires and explosions, to catastrophic events and across the different parts of the country and the world. Today, I'm going to be actually speaking to you about an event that occurred last summer in Beirut that some of you have heard about, I'm sure, maybe all of you, but what you haven't heard is the follow-up, unless you were involved in it yourself. The interesting thing about this was the methodology that was put into place to actually determine specifically where the blast occurred, the actual center of the blast, and of course, and more importantly, what was the causation of the blast. So today I'm going to provide you some background and some pictures that were all created by another entity called Forensic Architecture and another group, Meta Mazur, which are based in Lebanon itself. They did all this work and put it out into the public domain for firms like mine to be able to present it to groups like this. And I will be able to answer some questions, but generally I was not specifically involved in this, but it's a very interesting event. And the methodology, once again, on how they went forward to establish the location and the specific causations is something that I think all of you might be interested in, and I hope so. So, Mike, go ahead. Mike, can you there? Click. Aha, thank you. This is an aerial view of the harbor. Actually, it was taken the day before this explosion event. You notice that there are two vessels, or a number of vessels in the harbor. And when we look at the next slide, you're going to see some changes. This is the central harbor, and right in the middle of the bottom, let's call it center of the picture, you will see a number of what are grain silos and concrete grain silos. And I want you to take note of those in the next couple of pictures. Go ahead, Mike. So this is a photograph taken from residents not too far away, a few moments after the fires initiated. And what really appeared to be a relatively small localized fire at the time did prove to be the source of severe destruction throughout this area of the harbor and to the grain silos that I mentioned earlier. Mike, please. As you watch this, this was the event. Can you go back and show that once again, Mike? Okay, now watch the different colors of smoke, and this potential sequence is in real time. So you're going to see something, you'll see more later on that will actually help us describe the location and the sources of the causation of the blast. Mike, go ahead. So this was a scene slightly offshore of the harbor, taken from a nearby workboat. And the next slide, Mike.
Oh my God.
That plume rose almost almost 2/3 of a mile in height. I believe it's 755 meters to the top of that red plume. If you look at that particular plume, you'll be able to see at least actually 5 different shades of coloring, all of which relate to the substances that just blew up. And those are critical in the forensic aspect for determining what was in the building that blew. And of course, later on, we're going to establish where things were. Okay, Mike. So a little bit of background. Again, it was August 4th of this past summer. This event was considered a catastrophic explosive event. It did unfortunately result in over 200 deaths of individuals. There were over 7,500 injuries. The structural damage and the physical damage resulted in everything from typical ceiling collapses and walls and windows being blown out, with over 300,000 homeless individuals after all was said and done. The total estimate of the damage was over $15 billion, and that did not include loss of business revenue for the individual shop owners and so forth. Okay, Mike. Take a look at, you saw this picture on the left before, and you can see where the vessels are located, and then you take a look at the picture on the right. This was taken 2 days after the event, and you notice in the circle a nice yellow crater. That is the location of the warehouse that used to be and was the epicenter of the explosion. You also notice that outboard of that, what was the wharf in that area, there are no longer 2 vessels laying there. Apparently they were completely destroyed and or sunk. So they're no longer there, and they were not removed per se by others. And if you take a closer look, you can see the individual metal warehouses that were blown apart, toasted like crispy critters. And if you look a little closer, right in the bottom of the yellow circle, if you look at the silos, approximately half of them are completely gone. The roof is gone. The connecting structure is gone. And as a result, the storage capacity and what was being stored resulted in a total loss. And we'll talk a little bit about that further. Does anybody see anything other that in the photograph, anything else in the photograph that's unique? If you do, unmute yourself and speak out.
Good afternoon, it's William Ackley. You got an overturned vessel over on the far side or upper portion of the picture.
There you go. Good observation. Okay. You can mute yourself again, William. Thank you.
And all the cars and all the warehouses are gone also.
Yes, very much so. Again, this picture was taken a few days later, so some new cars have come into the picture, but there are definitely, there was severe damage, of course, throughout this whole region. So, and you can see how what I believe are it was a railroad track, and there's some cars in front of the warehouses running on a diagonal across the harbor there, the upper harbor. Those are all blast covered with concrete and debris. So it was quite an event to just clean up the mess. Okay, Mike. To your observation, this is a picture of that overturned cruise ship, a 390 footer that was about 1,500 feet away from the epicenter of the blast, and over she went, probably totaled as a result, because it would have taken so long to right her, and she's an older vessel anyway, so most likely she was totaled, but not sure. But that gives you an idea of what a blast effort, the force of a blast could do, especially if you were standing there. Go ahead, Mike. This aerial shot was taken on August 6th by Reuters TV, a helicopter. You can see there's still some smoke, and in the right center of the blast area. I honestly can't tell if that is some heated flame underneath that center portion or not, but it was definitely still a rough and raw area to try to enter. You can see the crater area pointed out. We did that, and this, of course, was taken by a drone. So it gives you an idea of what the epicenter will do. That blast not only goes up and out, it also goes down. So it blew away the whole foundation of the building. It was the warehouse building that it was all occurring in. Go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry, let's go back one picture. I just wanted to show you something. If you notice the lack of damage on the upper right portion of the screen, you see vessels there, you see cars there, you see a variety of things. And the reality was there was very little blast effect to the northeast, if you will, in this photograph. And why is that? Because of the positioning of those silos. They took the brunt of the effort, and of course, being all reinforced concrete, and Beirut being a war-torn area, they know how to rebuild things, fortunately and unfortunately. So you can see that location of the blast actually was, while it was very important and it damaged things to the west and to the northwest, it didn't do nearly as much damage to the things to the northeast and east. So, okay, thank you, Mike. So a little bit of a summary. There were 2 explosions, the second being much larger than the first. They set off this blast at about 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time in the States, or approximately 5 p.m. I believe it was about 5 p.m. in Beirut time. Of course, people were just starting to come home from work and so forth. So there were a lot of people on the streets or in shops, and even early in the nightclubs and so forth, and the shopping areas. So it did a tremendous amount of damage, and that's why so many people were injured and killed. Possibly more would have been killed if they had all been at home, say late at night or something of that nature. As I mentioned earlier about the silos having been destroyed, you can see the pictures, and this is the side closest to the blast. So actually 85% of the grain supply was instantly destroyed, as you can read, but the remaining was became inedible or usable. So effectively, all of the grain supply was destroyed in this one single blast. It took them a number of weeks, even with international emergency response, to resupply that grain. And then they had issues of how to store it once it was received in the port. So a lot of logistics were involved in the recovery effort, besides just this cleanup. Go ahead, Mike. As you can see, it's a busy port. They have 10 loading and unloading cranes, container cranes, and the port was pretty active, as you can see. Now, this picture was taken on 22nd of August of 2019. So it's not representative of, 18 days after the storm or the explosion at all. But the issue that I wanted to bring forward was, unfortunately, with COVID being such a worldwide battle right now, 17 fully packed containers had just arrived and were awaiting distribution to the local hospitals full of personal protection devices, and they were all destroyed. So Beirut and Lebanon people were really, unfortunately, put back and limited by the loss of those 17 containers. I hope they've recovered by now, gotten what they needed. Go ahead, Mike. So it's always obviously the elephant in the room is what caused this devastation and why, and did it happen, and could it have been prevented? There was a number of inquiries that whether or not this was an intentional hostile act of sabotage, or an accidental conflagration, or was it just an act of Mother Nature? Static electricity set something off. Or did one or more people just screw up and it happened? So that's why a forensic investigation was instigated to help identify what really did happen and hopefully keep it from happening again. Okay, bye. So the process that was put into place was first to recover as much video from the local community as possible. And once the physical photos and videos from closed circuit televisions and so forth were recovered from as many angles as possible, the process of using photogrammetry was put into place, and it was with those photos and timelines that are built into the CCTV systems, they were able to identify and focus in on, from known locations of where the photos were taken or captured. They were able to identify from angular evaluation what buildings, what part of the harbor blew up specifically, and what we'll find going forward is what the process of explosion, how it occurred. As you will read there, the smoke plumes, as we talked about earlier, were going to be examined for their different specific size and color, because that coincides with the development of the fire and the different materials within the within the building or buildings that ultimately caught fire and exploded. The U.S. helped by providing immediate support through NASA satellite images to document and show this area of damage and the area surrounding the blasts. so they could pinpoint its not only its origin location, but the level of the blast using the radius of the blast damage circle. Go ahead, Mike. So again, a little bit more into the photogrammetry issue. You can see the picture on the right here is a captured photograph from one of the higher buildings, and the white smoke there is early on in the fire development. And you see it's starting to get near the bottom of like the center of the photograph. You can see where the smoke is a bit darker, a little grayer and so forth. And that's suggesting that something with petroleum products is starting to catch fire. Again, using this photo, and you can see the indicated 1, 2, 3, and 4 are individual structures. And from that, you can go to look at the picture on the left, and you can see how they matched the location of those individual buildings and structures. And you can see them named, there's actually 5 structures, I'm sorry. And that relates to the area of where the photograph was captured, and it documents the validity, establishes the validity of the photogrammic evaluation process. Okay, Mike. So this is obviously another photograph taken from a residential area. You can see in this photograph that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 specific fire colors of smoke. And these are very important because this plume right there is what was after the big blast, right after that concussion force that you saw in the earlier slide off the boat. And using this color spectrum, the forensic scientists would help evaluate what actually was burning and blew off in this particular configuration. What we learned, what they learned, was that from available inventory records and what blew off from the coloring, they verified that over 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate, which, as you all know, is commonly used in fertilizers, but also in making explosives, had been stored for an excessively long period of time, over 6 years, as it turned out, and what really wasn't meant to be, and we'll talk about that in a second, the ammonium nitrate proved to be the primary source of the chemical reaction that resulted from the blast, but it was not the initial causation of the fire. As it turns out, ammonium nitrate actually is relatively inert unless it is mixed with other chemicals to and basically given a spark. Okay, Mike. So this photo is a sequence. It's about, I think it was about 6 minutes long, but we've shortened it. And there'll be you can watch I want you to watch the area of the smoke and how it changes color and what else you see in the picture. Go ahead, Mike. The jerkiness is how we shortened it. Though it doesn't seem to be moving. There we go. Brown is bad, that is for sure. Mike, be prepared to stop this.
Sure, no problem.
Needs to be restarted or something. There you go. It's now in slow motion purposely. Notice the flame. Notice the sparks. What do you think those are? Okay. Next. Just next. Okay. Does anybody have an idea before we go on about what those sparks were?
Ammunition, munitions, 2 suggestions there.
Neither one.
All chemicals, static, electrical.
Static electricity?
No. Those are all great ideas, but as it turned out, anybody else before I?
Phosphorus has been offered.
Partially. The answer is, and thank you for all providing those suggestions. The answer is fireworks. There were tons of fireworks stored in the one corner, upper corner of the warehouse. And what you're going to learn a little bit later is that there was excessively large quantities of 3 or 4 very volatile things. Okay, here we are. The blast, as you can see, was basically measured to be a 3.3 magnitude earthquake. For any of you who are familiar with this general area, you can see that Beirut is right on the coast and Cyprus is offshore about 100 miles. And it was felt in Cyprus. When there'll be another slide coming up that will show you the area of damage in and around the city of Beirut. Anyway, go ahead. Next, Mike. Here's this one shows you the area of destruction. Windows were blown out about 15 miles away. You can see the red dot in the lower right portion of the screen where Beirut is relative to the full Mediterranean. You can see where the blast center was, and of course that's the widest area of destruction, of the heaviest destruction. But as you can see with the radiuses, it was about a 6-mile circle of heavy damage. So, okay, Mike. Okay, this is a group photograph of reconstruction of the warehouse. It was actually it's a computer generated warehouse on the upper picture. The lower picture is a real picture of the existing warehouse. That pile that you're seeing with all the dust cover over the top, over the top of the bags, is the ammonia nitrate. And this is what they evaluated, and what they ultimately were able to determine is specifically where within the warehouse each of these components were sitting. If you look at the upper picture, you can see an 8 in the near the top of the darkened area of the ceiling, and there is a 9 closer to the forefront of the picture, and there's other numbers going back. That means this stuff was primarily between 8 and 9 doors, segments of the warehouse where it was being stored. You can tell by the original picture that was taken at some point in time, long before this blast, how long this stuff had been sitting there, because just by all the dust that's on top of it and where it had been sitting so long. You can also see that some of the bags are broken open and some of the stuff is spilled out haphazardly around. And ironically, between 2014 and 2017, custom officials had been seeking court appointment and responsibility to be able to dispose of this large cache of ammonium nitrate. Coincidentally, it was only earlier last week, or this current week, because it's only Saturday, that multinational investigations are finally underway into the ownership of those pallets. And it was stored, pallets of the stored ammonium nitrate. And they're looking for sanctions against the distribution of the individuals who own them, and because of their known militant relationships, I should say their relationships with militant organizations who are known for their warring activities. The further information that was developed forensically is that the guy who owns these companies, owns the company and owns all of this ammonium nitrate, and who brought it in years ago, has just tried to slip under the bonds of Lebanese legal services and moved his corporate structure, not just as himself, but his corporate structure from the Lebanon area to London. And he's got a number of shell companies that they've been tracing, and they were all of these shell companies had their community of residents and organization transferred from Lebanon to London on the same day. So it's very unusual, but then they all get traced back to the same person. So the legal groups are really trying to bear down on the individual who actually owns all this stuff. A second ironic issue is that these bags are here only because, or were there only because the ship that was carrying them back in 2014, I guess, had to make an emergency stop into the port, and they offloaded. They were not intended to be shipped to Beirut, and but once they got there, apparently there wasn't any means, legal or otherwise, to get them out of there. So this is what ultimately occurred. Okay, Mike. Now this following video is a few minutes long. I think it will be interesting for you to see and listen to what these folks have to say, because this was the crux of the whole thing. And it's, unless there's any particular questions right now, we'll go ahead and start this. Okay, Mike.
Shortly after 6 p.m. on August the 4th, an explosion ripped through the port of Beirut. It killed more than 200 people, wounded over 6,500, and destroyed large parts of the city. Forensic architecture was invited by Madame Mass to examine open source information, including videos, photographs, and documents to provide a timeline and a precise 3D model to help investigate the events of August the 4th. The model is available via this link. The first photograph of the warehouse on fire was uploaded to Twitter at 5:54 p.m. We carefully geolocated this photograph by identifying the key buildings and calculated the camera's cone of vision. In this image, we identified the location of the source of the smoke plume at the northeast corner of Warehouse 12. Smoke plumes are continuously transforming and have a unique shape at every moment. We modelled the plume at this crucial stage to help synchronise other videos without a timestamp. A video shot at around the same time from one of the balconies of the residential tower building shows the same source of fire clearly on the same side of the warehouse. The shape of the plume and the heat source suggests that the fire had evolved. Another video, starting at 5:58 p.m. from the nearby St. George Hospital, provides 10 minutes of uninterrupted footage of the warehouse. Within 2 minutes, the smoke thickens and its colour changes to a darker shade. According to Gareth Collett, a UN explosives analyst we consulted, this suggests that the material burning inside the warehouse has changed.
Notice the color spectrum at the top.
At 6:07 p.m, a new intense heat source appears on the other, northwestern side of the warehouse, here, followed by a different, larger plume. The sparks that follow suggest the presence of small explosive charges, such as fireworks. 35 seconds later, at 6:08 p.m, a large spherical plume appears above the centre of the warehouse. According to the explosives analyst, the symmetrical shape of the sphere suggests that it's a single-point explosion originating in one particular place within the warehouse, and it's possible that as little as half of the 2,750 sacks of ammonium nitrate stored inside detonated. We use the shape of the two plumes from these explosions as metadata to synchronise the remaining footage. This video, taken from further back, provides an uninterrupted view of the events that followed. Within the span of 9 seconds, the spherical plume projected high into the atmosphere. Several tons of particulates thicken the air, and a red-coloured plume, 755 metres high, rose over the warehouse. We have thus identified 4 types of smoke plumes emanating from different parts of the warehouse within the space of these 14 minutes. The first plume, at 5:54 p.m, emanates from the northeast corner of the warehouse. The second plume, at 6 p.m, is from the same source point but has a darker colour. The third plume appears on the northwest side of the warehouse at 6:07 p.m. The final plume is developed from a spherical explosion located at the centre of the warehouse at 6:08 p.m. Each of these smoke plumes, with their distinct shape and colour, provide indications as to the arrangement of goods in the warehouse, the way the fire developed, and the layout of what was stored inside. A close-up examination helps in understanding the evolution of fire inside the warehouse. Early footage shows smoke leaking out of every opening, including the windows and the ceiling vents. From this point, at about 5:56 p.m, the temperature inside the warehouse started rising rapidly. This video, taken from further back, provides an uninterrupted view of the events that followed. Within the span of 9 seconds, the spherical plume projected high into the atmosphere. Several tons of particulates thicken the air, and a red-coloured plume, 755 metres high, rose over the warehouse. We have thus identified 4 types of smoke plumes emanating from different parts of the warehouse within the space of these 14 minutes. The first plume, at 5:54 p.m, emanates from the northeast corner of the warehouse. The second plume, at 6 p.m, is from the same source point but has a darker colour. The third plume appears on the northwest side of the warehouse at 6:07 p.m. The final plume is developed from a spherical explosion located at the centre of the warehouse at 6:08 p.m. Each of these smoke plumes, with their distinct shape and colour, provide indications as to the arrangement of goods in the warehouse, the way the fire developed, and the layout of what was stored inside. A close-up examination helps in understanding the evolution of fire inside the warehouse. Early footage shows smoke leaking out of every opening, including the windows and the ceiling vents. From this point, at about 5:56 p.m, the temperature inside the warehouse started rising rapidly. The smoke is visible as it changes colour to a darker shade, in this footage, from the east side. We stabilise the footage to reveal the full extent of the warehouse. The sounds of fireworks starts being heard at approximately 5:59 p.m. It shows that many windows and doors are shut. According to the expert, confinement creates hotspots, areas of high temperature in which ammonium nitrate can get close to its combustion point. As reported by media outlets, the fire brigade arrived approximately 4 minutes after an initial call was made to the station at 5:54 p.m. In this footage, taken by the fire brigade on their arrival to the scene, the sound of fireworks continues to be heard. The 2,750 tonnes of ammonium nitrate were unloaded to this hangar in October 2014. And, as early as December of that year, various port and customs officials warned of the dangers posed by its storage. Many subsequent warnings were issued. In February 2015, for example, a chemical forensics expert commissioned by the Lebanese courts to report on the state of the stored ammonium nitrate described that 70% of the sacks were torn open, their contents spilling out, and some of the crystals had darkened. Leaked images from February 2020 indicate that the storage conditions had not improved. The sacks were still torn open and their contents were still spilling out. The bay numbers visible in the ceiling allowed us to locate these bags in bay 9 and 10. The images show the presence of a container and a stack of wooden pallets. Another video, taken on December the 18th, released by news outlet Al Jadid, shows the state of ammonium nitrate bags stored at bay 6 and surrounding door 9. Stacked ammonium nitrate bags are blocking the entrance. Here, we can see the numbers for bays 4 and 5. On the right of the videographer, between door 9 and 10, a white-coloured wall is visible, suggesting the presence of a small service room. Together, these videos and images allowed us to map a total of 243 bags of ammonium nitrate in the space. Given the location of the source of the spherical plume, here at bay 8, the remaining 2,507 bags of ammonium nitrate should have been stored here, occupying almost 2,000 metres squared of space. But given the haphazard way the visible bags are stored, the space the entire stockpile occupied was likely larger. News reports suggests that in addition to the ammonium nitrate, the warehouse also stored 23 tons of fireworks, 50 tons of ammonium phosphate, 5 tons of tea and coffee, 5 rolls of slow-burning detonating cord, and 1,000 car tyres. Each of these materials burns differently. The combustion of tyres, for example, produces a dark and thick plume. According to the explosives expert, it could correspond to the dark plume we had located on the northeast corner of the warehouse, so we placed the tyres roughly here. The expert also told us that the white plume that appeared on the northwest of the warehouse corresponds to the ignition of fireworks. We therefore placed the fireworks roughly in this corner. From an engineering perspective, this is the spatial layout of a makeshift bomb, on the scale of a warehouse, awaiting detonation. According to Gareth Collett, ammonium nitrate is extremely difficult to detonate by fire alone. However, when confined and contaminated, this can lead to catastrophic detonation. It is sensitized by the presence of even the smallest quantity of additives, and hence should be separated. We reviewed international standards for the storage of ammonium nitrate. Internationally accepted benchmarks include British regulations. According to British standards, stacks of ammonium nitrate must be limited to 300 tons, and each stack must be at least 1 metre away from walls and other stacks. Australian standards are more stringent. Bags must be arranged in 500-ton stacks, but should be stored 890 metres away from the closest residential buildings. Using their equation to calculate safe distances, we can determine that a 2,750 stack of ammonium nitrate should have been stored 1,570 metres away from the closest residential building. NASA's damage map illustrates the extent of the blast. All these regulations prohibit the storage of combustible or explosive materials, such as tyres or fireworks, in proximity to ammonium nitrate. This fact highlights the substantial and sustained state negligence which led to the formulation of a makeshift bomb. Around 1,000 of the survivors and victims' families have called for an independent investigation and public access to all relevant documents. As the search for political and economic accountability for the explosion of August the 4th continues, Forensic Architecture and Madame Mass are making the model, the geolocated videos, and the source material used in the research publicly available via this link.
You're welcome to copy that if you'd like to follow it any further.
Shortly after...
All right, Mike, yeah, there you go. Go to the last slide, please.
You want me to move on?
Yes, please.
Yeah, keep going.
Next.
Shortly after 6...
Okay, just to give credit where credit is due, these are the individuals who actually pulled all that together and made it available for people like myself and to present it to you. Next. Any questions, anyone?
Bob, I'm sure there will be. Let's see. Okay, so Mike wanted to know, is there or was there moisture on the floor? And would that have had any bearing? Catherine would like to know what was the point of origin?
Okay. As best as we have been able, I have been able to determine from my research, in addition to what you've all seen, moisture was not a specific causation, being that it's on the waterfront. And the day of the event was a bright, sunny, dry, hot probably humid day in August in Beirut. Moisture was not a specific issue. The area of origin apparently was near the fireworks, which most likely, based on the fire sequence and the smoke sequence, ignited something in there. Could have been electrical. We don't really know. Ignited the fire or the tires, and the tires and the fireworks lit off, and those internal flashes within the contained space of the warehouse, and the fact that the windows were all effectively closed, which kept all the heat in, provided the means for the internal temperature of the building, inner space of the building, to reach the ignition temperature of the ammonium nitrate.
Right, okay, so I've got a couple more points here. Let's just pick them off. Jonathan Deegan, I hope you're well, Jonathan, good to see you, asks, how does this compare to the 1947 Texas City explosion of ammonium nitrate?
Good question. They have been listed. This was smaller than that one, but the amount of damage and human loss was greater in this one.
I mean, that's an interesting point. I mean, from a layman's point of view, it seems extraordinary that only 200 people died when you see the scale of that blast.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, we watched it unfolding on the television, and you suddenly thought, gosh, you know, thousands will be dead when you see that happening, especially with people in high-rise, you know, tower blocks and so on.
Right.
Bill wants to ask any thoughts about terrorism.
Well, of course, being in a warring nation, area, I should say, the government was very concerned that it was potentially espionage or some kind of bomb with regards to the governmental concerns going on over there. But as it proved, it was not.
Yeah, we picked that up very early in Europe, actually, on European news. They ruled that out very early in the investigation. Bruce has asked, actually, could we provide the link for the forensic review again? That'll come through on the video when we send that over to you, Bruce. I'm just conscious about time and the need to keep reasonably on schedule. Any final questions? Okay, question from Jack. How will this affect the current IMDG carriage and storage regulations? Any preliminary recommendations for this commodity? Do you know, or does anyone know? I don't know.
I don't know. I suspect that the local governments on the Med specifically will be more cognizant of what is going into their warehouses and how densely populated those goods are being stored. I would suspect any new construction will require fire safety matters, capability and containment much more stringent than they were years ago.
I did see something actually, Bob, in the UK news again, in the last 10 days, that they are actually trying to search for and arrest the captain of the ship who brought the consignment in originally.
Wow.
That seems a little harsh.
Yes. They need a scapegoat in that case, I think.
Looking for a scapegoat springs to mind, doesn't it? It really does.
Right.
Okay. Bob, what can I say? Fantastic.